The dog behind Nancy Guthrie's home goes crazy at 2 a.m.
You can't hide a vehicle.
For Nancy Guthrie, it is a white vehicle.
Regarding medical records, that's going to be a tough one to get past.
The investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie took a critical turn when detectives began focusing more closely on her home, the last place she was known to be. In many cases, the answers are not found far away, but hidden within the very space a person felt safest. For investigators, the house was no longer just a residence. It was a potential source of truth. When authorities first entered the property, everything appeared quiet, almost too quiet. The rooms were still, untouched in a way that suggested routine had been suddenly interrupted. There were no immediate signs of forced entry, no obvious evidence of a struggle throughout the home. But experienced investigators know that what is missing can be just as important as what is visible. Nancy's personal belongings remained inside. Items she would normally take with her were still in place, raising immediate concerns about whether she had left voluntarily. Detectives began documenting every detail, from the position of objects to subtle inconsistencies that might otherwise go unnoticed. Each room was examined carefully, as if the walls themselves might hold clues. The focus quickly shifted to specific areas of the house, particularly near the entrance, where small details began to stand out. While nothing was immediately conclusive, the scene suggested that something may have happened within those walls during the night. As more attention returned to the case, interest from the public began to grow again. If you're following this investigation and want to stay updated, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Because as investigators continued to analyze the house, they began to realize that the answers to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance might not be far away at all, but hidden in details that had yet to be fully understood. As investigators continued examining the home of Nancy Guthrie, their attention expanded beyond the physical space to the life she lived inside it. Understanding Nancy's routine became just as important as analyzing the evidence itself. In cases like this, the smallest detail in a person's daily life can sometimes explain the biggest mystery. Nancy was known for consistency. Her days followed a pattern that rarely changed, and that predictability made her sudden disappearance deeply concerning. She kept in close contact with her family, often speaking with them regularly. Missing calls or failing to respond without explanation was something that simply did not align with who she was. That silence became one of the earliest warning signs that something was wrong. Inside the house, everything reflected that same sense of order. Items were neatly arranged, and nothing appeared out of place at first glance. There were no signs that she had packed or prepared to leave, no indication of a trip or sudden decision. Investigators noted that her routine seemed to have been interrupted rather than completed. Detectives also began asking important questions. Had anything changed in the days leading up to her disappearance? Did anyone notice unusual behavior or unexpected visitors? In many investigations, the answers are not always obvious at the start. They often emerge slowly, through careful comparison of patterns and timelines. Neighbors were questioned, but no one reported anything clearly suspicious. The quiet nature of the area made the situation even more puzzling. It was a place where people felt secure, where something like this felt out of place. As more people began following the case, curiosity continued to grow. If you're interested in real investigations like this, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Because while Nancy's life appeared calm and predictable, investigators were beginning to suspect that something unexpected had disrupted that routine in a way no one had seen coming. The timeline surrounding the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie became one of the most critical pieces of the investigation. Detectives knew that understanding her final known movements could reveal what happened during the hours no one could account for. Every minute mattered, and even the smallest gap in time could hold the answer. On the evening she was last seen, Nancy had followed her usual routine. After spending time with family, she returned to her home in the Catalina foothills area near Tucson at approximately 9:50 p.m. There was nothing unusual about that moment. It was a normal end to a normal day, the kind that gave no indication of what was about to unfold. But after she entered her home, everything changed. Investigators began reconstructing the hours that followed, focusing on what could be confirmed and what remained uncertain. Phone records were reviewed to determine if there had been any activity after she arrived home. Detectives also looked into whether any neighbors had seen or heard something during the night. At first, there were no clear answers, only silence and unanswered questions. By the next morning, concern had already begun to grow. Nancy failed to respond to calls, something that immediately stood out to her family. As time passed without any contact, that concern turned into urgency. A family member went to check on her, expecting to find a simple explanation, but instead discovered that she was not there. That moment shifted everything. What had seemed like a possible misunderstanding quickly became a serious situation. Authorities were contacted, and investigators began treating the case with increasing urgency. As more details began to emerge, public interest continued to grow. If you're following this case and want to stay updated, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Because the timeline may have seemed simple at first, but investigators were beginning to realize that something had happened within those missing hours that no one had yet been able to explain. When investigators returned to examine the home of Nancy Guthrie in greater detail, the focus shifted from the broader timeline to the smallest physical clues left behind. What had once appeared to be an ordinary residence was now treated as a carefully controlled scene, where every object, every surface, and every position could hold meaning. In cases like this, answers are often hidden in details that are easy to overlook at first. As detectives moved through the house, they began documenting each room with precision. Furniture placement, lighting conditions, and the arrangement of personal items were all recorded. Nothing was considered too small to matter. Even the absence of disruption in certain areas raised questions. If something had happened inside the home, why did so much of it appear untouched? Attention soon turned to areas near the entrance, where subtle inconsistencies began to stand out. Investigators noted slight irregularities, details that might not have been obvious during the initial examination. These were the kinds of observations that required experience to recognize, and they suggested that the situation may not have been as simple as it first appeared. Forensic teams worked methodically, examining surfaces for trace evidence. In many investigations, it is not large, dramatic signs that reveal the truth, but microscopic traces that require careful analysis. Detectives understood that even the smallest finding could shift the direction of the case. At the same time, they began considering possible scenarios. Could Nancy have encountered someone at the door? Was there an interaction that escalated quickly and left behind only minimal signs? These questions remained open, with no immediate answers. As more attention returned to the case, public curiosity continued to grow. If you're following this investigation and want to stay updated, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Because as investigators continued to analyze the house, they were beginning to realize that the truth might not be obvious, but it could still be hidden somewhere within those walls. As the investigation into Nancy Guthrie continued, detectives began looking beyond the interior of the home and into the surrounding area. In many cases, what happens outside can be just as important as what happens inside. This is where surveillance footage became a key focus, offering a chance to capture moments that no one witnessed directly. Investigators began collecting video recordings from nearby homes, security systems, and any cameras positioned along the street. Hours of footage were reviewed carefully, often frame by frame, as detectives searched for anything that might stand out. For long stretches, there was nothing unusual, just quiet streets and still surroundings that reflected the peaceful nature of the neighborhood. But then something caught their attention. Within the time frame investigators believed the incident may have occurred, a figure appeared on one of the recordings near Nancy's property. The individual was dressed in dark clothing, and their face was not clearly visible. What made the moment stand out was not just the presence of the person, but the way they moved, slow, cautious, and deliberate, as though aware of their surroundings. Detectives began analyzing the footage in greater detail, trying to determine whether this individual had approached the house or simply passed by. Even without clear identification, the presence of the figure introduced a new possibility, that someone had been near the property at a critical moment in the timeline. This discovery shifted the direction of the investigation. What once seemed uncertain was beginning to take shape as something more intentional, though many questions still remained unanswered. As more viewers began following the case, interest continued to grow. If you're interested in real investigations like this, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Because as investigators continued to study the footage, they believed this unidentified figure could be the key to understanding what really happened the night Nancy Guthrie disappeared. As the investigation into Nancy Guthrie moved forward, detectives returned to the physical evidence with a renewed sense of urgency. In many cases, breakthroughs do not come from new discoveries, but from looking at existing evidence through a different lens. This phase of the investigation focused on careful re-examination, where even the smallest overlooked detail could become significant. Forensic teams revisited the materials collected from the house, applying updated techniques and more precise methods of analysis. Surfaces that had already been examined were tested again, this time with a deeper focus on trace elements, subtle marks, patterns, or residues that might not have been fully understood before. Investigators knew that these microscopic details often tell a story that is invisible to the naked eye. At the same time, detectives began comparing physical evidence with the timeline they had constructed. They looked for consistency, whether the placement of objects, the condition of certain areas, and the sequence of events all aligned. When something didn't quite fit, it raised new questions. Was something moved after the fact? Was there a moment that had been misinterpreted? This stage of the investigation required patience. There were no immediate answers, only gradual progress built on careful observation and analysis. Each finding had to be verified, each possibility tested against the facts. It was a slow process, but one that often leads to the most reliable conclusions. Public interest in the case continued to grow as updates emerged. If you've been following this investigation and want to stay informed, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Because as investigators continued to re-examine the evidence, they were beginning to see patterns that had not been clear before, patterns that could bring them closer to understanding what truly happened inside Nancy Guthrie's home. As investigators continued working on the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, the case began to shift from isolated pieces of evidence to a broader attempt to connect everything together. Each detail, whether from the house, the timeline, or the surveillance footage, was no longer viewed separately, but as part of a larger pattern that needed to make sense. Detectives started aligning the timeline with the physical findings inside the home. They compared the estimated time Nancy returned home with the moment the unidentified figure appeared in the surveillance footage. The goal was to determine whether these events overlapped in a way that could explain what happened during those missing hours. Even a few minutes of overlap could be critical. At the same time, interviews were revisited. Investigators spoke again with neighbors, family members, and anyone who might have had contact with Nancy in the days leading up to her disappearance. Sometimes, people remember details differently over time, or small observations that once seemed unimportant begin to stand out. Detectives were looking for anything that could connect to the evidence they had already gathered. Public attention on the case continued to grow, bringing both helpful tips and increased speculation. While some information provided new leads, other claims had to be carefully filtered out. Investigators remained focused on verified facts, knowing that speculation could easily distract from the truth. As discussions about the case spread, more people became invested in finding answers. If you've been following this investigation, don't forget to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the final part of this story. Because as the pieces of the puzzle slowly began to come together, investigators were getting closer to understanding what may have happened, but one crucial question still remained unanswered. As the investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie reached its most critical stage, detectives were left balancing two realities. Progress had been made, but the truth was still incomplete. The evidence gathered from her home, the timeline reconstructed from her final known movements, and the surveillance footage all pointed toward the same conclusion. Something had happened that night, something that could not be explained by chance alone. Investigators continued to review every detail, determined not to overlook anything. In cases like this, even a single overlooked clue can delay answers for years. The house remained central to the investigation, its quiet room still holding questions that had yet to be fully answered. Detectives believed that the truth was there, hidden within the combination of physical evidence and the sequence of events that had been carefully pieced together. The unidentified figure seen in the surveillance footage remained one of the most significant leads. Despite ongoing efforts, identifying that individual proved difficult. Still, investigators continued to analyze the footage, compare it with other recordings, and follow any possible connections that might emerge. They understood that solving the case would likely depend on linking that figure to the events inside the home. For Nancy's family, the uncertainty remained the hardest part. They continued to hope for answers, holding on to the belief that the investigation would eventually reveal the truth. Their calls for information remained steady, reminding the public that even the smallest detail could make a difference. If you followed this story from beginning to end, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel for more real true crime documentaries. Because while this chapter of the investigation closes without a final resolution, the search for answers continues, and somewhere within the evidence, the truth about what happened to Nancy Guthrie is still waiting to be uncovered.